We're going to learn how to graph and solve quadratic inequalities now. Now the nice thing with graphing and solving these inequalities is that it's the same process as when we graphed the linear inequalities earlier. So first we graph the line, just like you normally would if it was an equal sign. Then you have to pay attention to, should it be dotted or should it be solid? Then you pick a test point to determine where to do your shading. And then you repeat the process with all the inequalities that are in your system. Once you have all the inequalities graphed, you darken the area that has all the overlap, and that would be where your solution is. So we're going to start out just by graphing one inequality, and we have y is less than negative x squared plus 8x minus 15. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to graph our parabola, just like as if it were an equal sign. Well, first I analyze the fact that it's in standard form, so I'm going to find my vertex by using the opposite of b over 2a. Now my opposite of b is going to be negative 8, and then my a is a negative 1, so I end up with negative 8 over negative 2, which is equal to a positive 4. So that gives me the x-coordinate of my graph. Now to find my y-coordinate, I plug the 4 back into my equation. So when I do that, okay, the 4 squared gives me a 16, but I need the opposite of that, so we're going to have negative 16. And then 8 times 4 gives me a 32, so I'm going to add that. And then I'm going to subtract 15 from it, and I end up getting my y value to be 1. So my vertex is at the point 4, 1. Then I need to do my table of values. So I go ahead and I pick an x, or make an xy chart. And since my vertex is at 4, 1, I need 2 points to the right of 4 and 2 points to the left of 4. So I'm going to pick 2 and 3 for my points to the left of 4, and I'm going to pick 5 and 6 for my points to the right of 4. When I plug the 2 back into my equation here, I end up getting a negative 3. When I plug the 3 back in, I get 0. When I plug the 5 in, I get 0. And when I plug the 6 in, I get negative 3. So now that I've got my table of values, I can go ahead and plot all of my points. Once you get your points plotted, you can go ahead and draw your line in, but now notice it needs to be dotted because there's no equal component up here with our inequality. So you would sketch in a dotted line here instead of a solid one to get our parabola. And now we need to decide where to shade. So I'm going to go ahead and test the point 0, 0. When I do that, I plug 0 in for my x and y values and see what happens to my statement. So once I plug my zeros in, I end up with 0 is less than negative 15. Now when I look at that, that is a false statement. What that means is that 0 is not part of my solution, and since 0, 0 is on the outside of my parabola, and it's not part of my solution, that means my solutions are on the inside of my parabola. So I would shade the interior of that parabola, and that would be my graph of my inequality. Okay, we're going to go ahead and graph a system now. Now the first thing I want to do is focus only on one of the inequalities, so I'm going to do the top one first. I need to get it in standard form, so I'm going to divide everything by 2, and when I do that, I'll be left with y is less than or equal to x squared over 2 plus x minus 3 halves. Now that it's in standard form, I can work on finding my vertex, and I take the opposite of b over 2a. Well, in this case, my b is a 1, so I'm going to have negative 1 over 2 times, and my a is 1/2. When I simplify that down, I actually end up getting negative 1. So the x-coordinate of my vertex is negative 1. Now when I plug that back into my equation, that will allow me to find my y-coordinate of my vertex. As I plug that back in, I end up getting my y-coordinate to be negative 2, so my vertex is at negative 1, negative 2. From there, I can do a table of values. I'm going to use my vertex as a reference point. So since my vertex is at -1, I'm going to pick 2 points to the left. I'm going to have that be -3 and -2. And then I'm going to pick 2 points to the right, which I'm going to pick 0 and 1. Now I have to plug each of these back into my equation to figure out what their y values are. When I put -3 in there, I end up getting 0 back. When I put -2 in there, I get -1.5 back. When I put 0 in there, I get -1.5 back. And when I plug a 1 in there, I end up getting 0 back. So now I'm going to go ahead and graph this first inequality, and then I'll go back and I'll work with my second inequality. Once I get my points plotted, I can go back and sketch my line in there. Now this one was less than or equal to, so it needs to be a solid line as we connect these dots. Okay. Now I need to pick a test point. I'm going to go ahead and test 0, 0, and I'm going to plug that into my equation to see where I need to shade. So I have 0 is less than or equal to 0 squared over 2 plus 0 minus 3 over 2. Well, when I solve that out, I get 0 is less than or equal to -3 over 2. That ends up being false. So 0, 0, my test point, was not a solution for this, which means I'm going to end up shading the outside of my parabola, because 0, 0 was on the inside and it didn't work. Now that I've gotten the first inequality done, we can tackle the second inequality. So now I'm going to be working with y is greater than x squared plus x minus 10. Start off by finding my vertex. It's already in standard form, so I don't have to rearrange it. So I need to do the opposite of b, all divided by 2a. And in this case, for my x-coordinate of my vertex, I get -1/2. Now to find my y-coordinate for my vertex, I need to plug it back into my equation here to figure out the y value. Well, when I plug that back in, I end up getting -10 1/4. So my vertex is at -1/2, -10 1/4. Now I can do my table of values. Since my vertex is at an x value of -1/2, I need 2 values to the right of it and 2 values to the left of it. So I'm going to pick -2 and -1, and then I'm going to pick 0 and 1. So I've got 2 to the left, 2 to the right. When I plug these x values back into my equation to find their y partners, -2 gives me back a -8, -1 gives me a -10 back, 0 gives me a -10 back, and 1 gives me a -8. So now I can go back to my graph and I can plot these new points. Okay, I've plotted these points in blue just so we can tell the difference between them. Now when I go to draw my line, I've got to come back and check my sign. It doesn't have the equal to part, so this one is going to be a dotted line that I need to connect it with. So I'm going to go ahead and do my dotted line for my parabola. And now I need to do my test point. So I'm going to go ahead and test the point 0, 0 again. And I'm going to plug it into my inequality. So 0 is greater than 0 squared plus 0 minus 10. And as I simplify that, I get 0 is greater than -10, which is true. So that means 0 is part of my solution set. Well, if I keep extending my parabola, 0 is on the inside of my parabola. So I need to shade the inside of my parabola. Now, our last thing we need to do is go back and darken the spot that is overlapped. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to darken that with a green. And my overlapped spots are going to be where it's outside of the red but inside the blue. So my solution set for the entire system would be where this dark green is.